When my husband died, Nathan was barely 5 years old. The weight of that night pressed against my chest, like the silence in our small house had grown so large it might swallow us both. I didn't have time for grief. Bills were stacked on the kitchen counter, rent was due at the end of the week, and a little boy with wide eyes still needed breakfast the next morning. I learned quickly that tears didn't pay for groceries. I worked mornings at a diner, afternoons shelving books in the library, and nights scrubbing offices until my back ached. My body was constantly sore, my eyes stung from exhaustion, but every time Nathan tugged my hand and whispered, "Mom, I'll make you proud," I believed him. Those words became fuel when I skipped meals so he could have seconds, when I wore the same shoes for years so he could have textbooks, when I turned down invitations because overtime meant we would survive. By the time Nathan was old enough, I scraped together enough to enroll him in a private school I could barely afford. Watching him walk through those gates, his small hand clutching mine, I felt a fragile kind of victory. He promised he would do great things, and I poured every drop of strength into that hope. Years later, when he grew tall and charming with his father's easy smile, I sent him off to business college with tears in my eyes. Watching him cross the graduation stage, I thought maybe the tide had finally turned. Maybe all the weary nights had built a foundation for him to stand higher than I ever could. But adulthood began to change him. The boy who once promised to make me proud carried himself now as though success was something owed, not earned. I tried to ignore the unease in my chest, to chalk it up to growing pains, but then Selena entered his life. He brought her home one Sunday afternoon, his hand clamped tightly around hers, as if she were a prize. Selena was beautiful in the way magazines taught women to be: flawless, makeup, sharp cheekbones, and a dress better suited for a gallery than my modest dining table. She smiled dazzlingly, but her eyes measured everything: the curtains I had sewn myself, the worn table where Nathan once did his homework, the casserole I had baked with care. She praised the meal, but her tone dripped with condescension. "So traditional," she murmured, twirling her fork. "I suppose recipes like this never go out of style." Nathan chuckled beside her, squeezing her hand, as though her words were harmless. I smiled politely, but something inside me tightened. The wedding came quickly, a lavish affair, orchestrated by Selena with precision. I stood in the front row watching my son beam as if he had been swept into a dream. I wanted to believe marriage would ground him in responsibility, that perhaps love would soften her sharp edges. But soon, I noticed how Selena steered every conversation while Nathan followed like a shadow. At dinners, she would remark how modern couples no longer relied on outdated traditions. "It must have been so different in your time, Evelyn," she would say, tilting her head with mock sweetness, indulging me like a relic. Each time Nathan laughed lightly, never once reminding her who had raised him, never once defending me. I swallowed my unease, convincing myself maturity would bring balance, but Selena's confidence only grew while Nathan's voice grew thinner. After the wedding, Selena carried herself as if she had married into a dynasty. At social gatherings, she paraded Nathan around, introducing him as the heir to Carter Construction, the visionary who would carry his father's empire into the future. I kept silent, smiling politely, though deep inside, I knew the truth: she didn't. When my husband died, the company hadn't fallen to Nathan. It had fallen to me. I inherited the majority shares. I was the one who endured years of board meetings, learning contracts, deciphering ledgers. At first, the men around the table dismissed me as a widow, dabbling where she didn't belong. But soon they realized I was not easily underestimated. I made hard calls, stood firm with numbers, and gradually turned skepticism into respect. For appearances, Nathan was allowed a ceremonial title enough to reassure clients who liked the idea of a young Carter at the helm. In truth, he had little to do beyond photographs and speeches written by others. He never asked for more responsibility, never questioned where decisions came from. To him, the title was enough. Selena, however, wore his title like a crown. She boasted of the empire they would inherit, the wealth she imagined already hers, treating me like a fading shadow of history. I said nothing. I had learned long ago that silence was not weakness, it was a weapon. I knew illusions are fragile things, and hers would shatter. What I did not know was how soon that day would come. The cracks widened when Nathan and Selena moved into the company-owned condo downtown. To them, it was a palace, but I knew it was nothing more than a lease and asset under the firm's name. Selena filled the rooms with imported rugs, crystal vases, and closets stuffed with clothes far beyond their means. She boasted of their new lifestyle, as if she had unlocked a destiny, speaking to friends about the empire she believed was now hers. I remained quiet, but each time I stepped through that door, I felt the air thicken with her entitlement. One evening, as I laid dinner on the table, Selena leaned forward, her voice sweet as poison. "You've had a good life here, Evelyn, but surely you'd be more comfortable in something smaller. Simpler. It's time you enjoy peace in your later years." Her eyes flicked toward the door, already picturing me leaving with my suitcase. I looked to Nathan, praying for even a flicker of loyalty. He nodded casually, his tone heavy with betrayal. "She's right, Mom. Maybe it's time you downsize. You don't need all this space anymore." He said it without malice, but without love either, just a shrug, as though my decades of sacrifice were a footnote. Selena mistook my silence for surrender, but silence was never surrender. I carried my plate into the kitchen, silverware clattering steady as my heartbeat thundered. The house was no longer a home. It had become a battlefield. Every gesture carried weight. Every word was a skirmish over respect. But it was the next evening when Selena finally dropped her mask completely. I had prepared roasted chicken, Nathan's favorite from childhood. She wrinkled her nose, pushed the plate aside, and scoffed. Then she reached into her designer purse, pulled out a crisp bill, and slid it across the table until it rested beside my hand. "Here," she said with a triumphant smile. $100. Book a cab to your old place. Goodbye." The room seemed to tilt. I stared at my son, begging silently for him to rise, to correct her, to defend me. But Nathan sat, motionless, eyes lowered, as if silence could erase the cruelty unfolding beside him. My heart hollowed out in that moment, but my hands did not tremble. I picked up the bill, folded it neatly, and set it on the counter. I would not lower myself with arguments. I would not be erased. That night, with steady breath, I dialed my lawyer, Ms. Harper, a woman whose mind was as sharp as glass and who had stood by me through years of boardroom storms. "Prepare the papers," I said softly. "It's time." The boardroom was no stranger to me. It was a place where signatures carried the weight of lives and decisions shaped futures. But that morning, it became a stage for arrogance. Selena swept in first, draped in a tailored suit, her confidence filling the air like perfume. Nathan trailed behind, slouched, his expression unreadable. I sat across from them, Ms. Harper at my side, her pen poised over a folder thick with documents. Selena smirked, crossing her legs with deliberate flair. "Let's make this quick," she began brightly. "Evelyn, we all know the company belongs to Nathan now. He's the CEO, the heir, the future. It's time you step aside and ensure he has full access to what's rightfully his. Naturally, I'll manage the household assets, so we'll need clear transfers." Her words spilled across the table with the arrogance of someone who had already crowned herself queen. Nathan nodded when prompted, never once correcting her. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap. Silence again, but this time, not from weakness, silence as a mirror for her greed. I let her paint her empire in bold strokes, revealing more about her illusions than she realized. She demanded titles, shares, property deeds she'd never seen. Her voice rang with certainty, echoing against the glass walls, until even her confidence began to sound hollow. When she finally leaned back smug and certain she had cornered me, Ms. Harper tapped her pen once and slid the first folder forward. "Shall we begin?" she asked softly. She turned to Selena with calm precision. Let's start with the condo. Contrary to your claims, this residence is company property. It is leased at market rate. It is not marital property, nor can it be transferred. Selena's smile faltered. She glanced at Nathan, who shifted in his seat, mumbling nothing. Her jaw tightened, the first crack in her mask. Ms. Harper continued, her voice cutting clean. Now, regarding corporate authority, Mr. Carter, she nodded toward Nathan, is not the CEO. He has no executive powers. His title is ceremonial only. The acting CEO and majority shareholder is Mrs. Evelyn Carter. The words landed like stones in the silence. Selena's face collapsed into disbelief. That's impossible, she snapped, turning to Nathan. You told me. But Nathan's face was pale, his usual charm drained. I never said I was running it, he stammered. I thought you knew. Selena's eyes widened to fury and panic breaking through her polish. Her voice rose cracking. So all this time you let me think? I leaned forward, then my voice steady. No, you let yourself think. You built castles in the air and moved into them before checking the foundation. The silence that followed was thicker than any words. Selena's breath came shallow and quick. Nathan sat hollow beside her, nothing more than a name. Their empire of illusions had crumbled, and the truth was mine to hold. Selena's composure began to unravel as the truth settled into the room. She demanded clarification, her voice rising, her hands trembling as if volume alone could rebuild her collapsing tower. Ms. Harper remained calm, sliding another document across the table with surgical precision. Here is the lease agreement for the condo, she said evenly. The monthly rate is listed here. As you can see, it exceeds Mr. Carter's salary by a considerable margin. Selena snatched the paper, her manicured nails scraping the edge. Her eyes scanned the numbers, and her confidence wavered. This can't be right, she whispered. We can't afford this. Nathan shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed with shame. I thought Dad owned it outright, he muttered. For once, the boy who had relied on charm and excuses had no shield, no easy grin to soften the blow. The condo, like everything else in their imagined kingdom, was never theirs. And regarding alimony, Ms. Harper continued crisply. Mrs. Carter has grounds to request support from both of you. Attempted displacement and financial misconduct are taken very seriously. Selena froze. Me? You can't mean me? Her voice cracked sharp with panic. Nathan finally turned toward her, frustration spilling out in a rush. You pushed this. You told me it was all ours. You said we'd live better, that I didn't need to worry. Look at us now. His words cut through the boardroom more cleanly than any contract ever could. For the first time, Selena had no reply. She stared at him, her mask stripped away, and the silence stretched heavy and suffocating. The arrogance that had once filled her voice was gone, replaced by raw fear. I sat across from them, steady, letting the weight of their choices hang where it belonged. I felt no triumph. Only the quiet recognition that greed and blindness had consumed themselves. Selena's eyes darted from the papers to Nathan's downcast face, and I saw it the moment she realized there was no fortune, no crown, no empire waiting for her. Just debt, disappointment, and the ruins of her own ambition. I rose slowly, gathering my things with calm certainty. We're finished here, I said, my voice measured. The truth speaks louder than your demands. In the weeks that followed, Selena's downfall came swiftly. One morning, she packed her things and vanished without a word, leaving Nathan alone in a condo he couldn't afford. Rumors spread through their social circle, whispers of debts and disgrace, of how the woman who once boasted of her empire had disappeared in the night. Nathan tried desperately to hold on to cover the rent, but he failed. Soon, he retreated into a modest apartment on the edge of the city. far from the glittering parties where Selena had once displayed him like a prize. It was only a matter of time before he showed up at my door. I remember the sound of his knock softer than it had ever been, and when I opened the door, he stood there with hollow eyes and wrinkled clothes. The shine that once carried him through rooms was gone. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I made a mistake. I thought she loved me. I thought I was more than this." I led him inside, poured him a cup of coffee, and listened as he spilled apologies between ragged breaths. He begged me to let him return to the company, to give him another chance to rebuild the life he had so carelessly let slip away. For a moment, I glimpsed the boy he once was, the little boy who promised to make me proud, who tugged my hand as we walked through school gates. My heart ached for him. But promises do not rebuild what has been burned. "Nathan," I said softly, "you will have to learn who you are without privilege carrying you. I cannot walk that path for you, and I will not undo what you chose." His eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. Deep down, he knew there was no saving hand left to grasp. That night, he left quietly, shoulders bent under the weight of his own decisions. I watched him walk away, fading into the shadows of the streetlights, and for the first time, I didn't feel hollow. I felt free. The noise surrounding Nathan and Selena faded quickly into silence. Their names slipped from conversations, their faces vanished from gatherings where they once flaunted themselves. But the company carried on steady under my hand. There were contracts to oversee families whose livelihoods depended on paychecks signed with my approval. I poured myself into that rhythm not as an escape, but as purpose. The board leaned on me without hesitation, trusting the steadiness I had proven through years of trial and sacrifice. No longer did I feel the shadow of being only a widow or just a mother. I was Evelyn Carter, the woman who had held the company together when others faltered. I had sat through storms, endured betrayal, and stood against arrogance, and I had not broken. At night, I returned home to a quiet that no longer felt oppressive but peaceful. The house once a battlefield was mine again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the skyline in gold and crimson, I sat at my desk with my leather-bound journal, the one I had filled with private thoughts for decades. I wrote slowly, deliberately, the words that had carried me through it all. Fortune can be stolen, but respect and truth cannot. I closed the book with a steady hand and stood by the window. Atlanta stretched before me alive with its endless hum, a city of ambition and grit. The reflection staring back at me in the glass was not a woman diminished by betrayal, but one rebuilt by it. Calm, certain, free. I knew then my story was not ending, it was only beginning. The months that followed carried a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Without Selena's arrogance filling every room or Nathan's silence cutting me deeper than words, I walked into each day with a steady sense of purpose. The company thrived under quiet, consistent leadership. Board members who once raised skeptical brows at a widow now leaned forward eagerly to hear my judgment. I no longer had to prove myself, I had already done so 100 times over. What remained was simply to lead. In the evenings, I returned to a home that had been reclaimed as mine, where once Selena's laughter had dripped with condescension. Now the silence carried peace. The curtains I had sewn by hand, the table where Nathan once scribbled his homework, the kitchen that had witnessed both sacrifice and humiliation. These things were no longer relics she could mock. They were reminders of resilience, proof that the life I built could not be pushed aside with a smirk and a crisp bill. Sometimes I thought of Nathan. I imagined him in his small apartment, stripped of Selena's illusions, staring at himself in the mirror and finally seeing the man he had become. A part of me mourned for him not just as a mother, but as a woman who once believed her sacrifices would shape him into something greater. But I had come to understand a truth that hurt and healed all at once. Love cannot carry someone who refuses to walk. Each choice was his, and the lessons waiting for him were not mine to soften. Selena's name flickered occasionally in whispers. Someone said she had moved to another city, chasing another fortune. But I no longer wasted breath on her. Arrogance devours itself, and hers had done so spectacularly. She was gone, leaving nothing but the echo of her own entitlement. For me, the future stretched wide and clear. I invested in new projects, expanded into regions my husband had once dreamed of but never reached. I mentored young women in the company women who reminded me of myself when I first walked into the boardroom, with grief in my heart and doubt on every face around me. I told them what I had learned the hard way, that strength is not the absence of pain, but the decision to rise with it still pressing on your chest. The nights were mine again. Sometimes I sat on the porch, journal in hand, listening to the city hum in the distance. Other times I walked the quiet halls of the office long after everyone had gone, letting the silence remind me of how far I had come. I no longer asked whether I was enough. I no longer waited for someone to affirm my place. I had earned it in blood, sweat, and silence, and I had no need to prove it again. One evening, as I closed the office and stepped into the dusky street, a thought came to me with the weight of finality. My life was not defined by what had been taken, but by what I had built despite it. The widow who once staggered under the weight of bills and exhaustion had grown into the woman who carried an entire company on her shoulders. The mother who once believed her son's promises had learned that pride does not come from borrowed words, but from the integrity of her own actions. I understood at last that dignity is not given, it is claimed. And no betrayal, no insult, no crisp bill tossed across a table can strip it away when you refuse to let go of it yourself. So I move forward, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I carry with me the truth that life will strip you bare, test you with fire, and tempt you with illusions. But if you hold steady, if you refuse to surrender your respect and your voice, then even the sharpest storms cannot break you. To anyone listening, anyone standing at the edge of their own breaking point, I would tell you this: you are stronger than the silence others mistake for defeat. You are more than the illusions others cast upon you. And sometimes the greatest victory is not in destroying those who tried to diminish you, but in living fully beyond them. If this story moved you, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts. Your support helps keep stories like this alive.